make up stuff about me because I gave her an open. I said, anything that she says about me, I will agree to. Hi everyone, I'm Kim. I went to UX Australia 2014. Who else went? Okay, all you guys, shut up. I'm talking to the other guys. No, seriously. The great thing about UX Australia is it's 2 days of the conference proper. There are workshops afterwards, and I'm just going to duck over here where I stand. There were 51 talks in 2 days, and only one of me, and 2 streams. And you can imagine, that's all I got to see. It was really frustrating. So what I'm going to try to do is explain to you how that was with me on day 3. Okay, so, yes, with the bum and all, because they feed you really well at UX Australia, and I had to, wait a while. Okay, so the thing about a conference, any conference, the reason why it's really hard to remember what the hell you just learned is because someone important said this, and they were so important I forgot who they were. But it was context versus content, right? And so the thing about conferences, and you'll just find this is wisdom right here, is that at a conference you get to learn and you widen what you need to learn. That's your context expanding, and that's actually harder than learning content. Content you learn in a class, you go deep. But when you go to a conference, you kind of just go, oh shit, I need to learn about that whole thing, which is probably a course, a semester, investing years in blogs, that kind of thing. So conferences are about context, which is why it's really hard to kind of go, what did you learn? I don't know, don't talk to me for 2 weeks, I'll think about it. So what I'm going to try to do is distill what I and my colleagues at Digital Learn, because we kind of huddled together after several days of just letting it digest. And we figured, what were the main things that came out of it? So this is going to be really hard because these guys are experts, right? They're going out and talking. And I'm pretty sure for the guys who actually went to the conference, sorry, am I talking just too fast? I've had a beer. Okay, so we kind of distilled everything that we found was actually our favorite lesson or what we gleaned from it. So there tends to be a hierarchy in terms of distilling information, or not a hierarchy, but like a progression. So there's a conference, it's the conference talk itself, which is someone's years of wisdom distilled into a 30-minute time slot. And then you have these amazing sketchnoters, right, who can put it onto a single page. And then you've got my 10 points coming up, so let's see how I go. First thing, so I'm not going to try to repeat to you everything that they told me. What I want you guys to figure out is when all the talks and the presentations become available on the UX Australia website, go and have a look at these ones. And some I've crawled together just because they're really good juxtapositions for each other. The first one wasn't a talk, it was a throwaway line in a talk, in a 10-minute talk. It was awesome. And it was, help people be awesome. And that's actually, I think, really relevant to everything that we do. Everyone in here's job is to help people be awesome. It's not to design the best tool, it's to design a tool that will help someone be awesome at something that they're doing, right? So actually the tool really should get out of people's way. So I'd like to see that on a t-shirt. I would wear that t-shirt. The second one was, don't be annoying. And I'll tie back to that at some point. You guys remember, for those who went and saw, Michelle Berryman talked about this. And she was referring to iBeacons, and you go past the iBeacon and it detects your phone and it sends you a message, but it sends you the same freaking message every time you pass that iBeacon. So yeah, if you're going to design something that's going to interact with someone, consider it, think about it. Think about the second time and the third time and the 17th time, and change your copy. That was a good one. Okay, so the keynote speaker, Greg, talked about 6 points, I think. But the one that resonated the most, and this actually kind of became a recurring thing that other speakers picked up during the conference, it was about democratized design. And the essence of this is we need to stop being an us and them type of thing. It's not just the UXer or the interaction designer or the designer, full stop, who gets to design. And what we actually need to do is create smarter teams. The developers need to get involved in the design, and they get to think about, be empowered with making design decisions. And the designer can then help mentor and provide the framework for them to actually do that work. And you basically just raise the IQ of the entire team in terms of design. And then the designers can actually work on the harder stuff, and everybody else can just get on with it, rather than being bottlenecks and silos. So I thought that was actually pretty cool. All right, a couple of talks were about being present, being interested, and listening. So there was even a workshop about how to be a kick-ass interviewer that Ruth did. But a lot of it was, in terms of user research that we do, we actually need to really pay attention to what the person in front of us is saying. Steve Portigal talked about, he did the workshop, and it was a really awkward workshop, can I just say, because we had to do these exercises, stare into people's eyes for 60 seconds, and just not stare, look. Yeah, it was hard not to stare when they say don't stare. But the idea was to be present, and we just had to kind of focus and figure out what was going on in our heads. And there's a lot of mental chatter going on in our heads all the time, which means that when you're doing research, you actually have to be conscious of the fact that, are you actually paying attention? Or are you picking up what they're putting down, kind of thing? Be interested was a really good point about the fact that if you're interviewing someone or you're finding out about their situation or their context, because that's the goal that you need to work with, you actually have to be interested. Don't just go through your script. Pay attention to them. It ties back to being present and listen. That was a key one that came through. All right, a couple of talks that went sketch badly, and prototype. And a lot of it was around, so this is the kind of skill building part of the conference. But Luke and Matt do amazing work as sketchnoters and as facilitators in terms of graphic facilitation. So when they put their material up, go and have a look, because they actually give you the visual alphabet of how to actually do sketchnoting. Anybody here can be an awesome sketchnoter, and they've shown us how. So that was pretty cool. Karan talked about the fact that if you're going to sketch, do it badly. Because as soon as you start showing off your fancy designer skills, you alienate people, because they actually won't be able to interact with it. They won't want to pick up that pen and go, no, I actually mean this, because the design was too pretty. So you actually need to make it rough, make it accessible that way. So that was a favorite as well. And Aras talked about prototyping. Always start with a prototype. And that prototype could be a sketch, or it could actually just be, mock something up, make it rough. And one of the examples, he was a complete foodie. And so his example was a chef who actually sketched out what his meals were going to look like. And he said, if a chef can sketch a meal, we have no excuse not to sketch a prototype. So, take a creative pause. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so creative pause is actually that whole thing about when you're in the throes of things, when you're just rapidly trying to figure out how this design is supposed to work, you actually really should stop at some point and just let that sink in. Let your brain cogitate on it. And there's a process that actually happens in your brain as you're learning new things. You need to let it settle, and you sleep on it. That whole phrase about sleeping on it actually works. So my team, our principal, John, always used to tell us, if you're in the swamp, that's okay. You're meant to be in the swamp. You're meant to be in the weeds. And so this kind of really reinforced it to say, that's important thinking time. Your brain's doing amazing things in the background, and one day it will just happen. So trust that that'll happen. But a couple of things that she talked about in this one, and I'm saying this secondhand because I didn't actually go to this one, but everyone else voted for it, is that you actually need to train your brain about how to think in creative ways. So sometimes pausing is a good way. Sometimes doing something else that you weren't normally doing, like brushing your teeth with your opposite hand, actually helps the brain kick in and do new things. And that just helps with the ideation. Okay, two different points that kind of fell into each other. Dominique talked about her experience of telling stories. So she's a service designer. And the way she actually illustrated the entire story, based on the user research they did for the Victorian Library, I think, they just put the story up on the wall, and the librarians, the staff at the library, were able to actually go up to it, identify themselves in the story, and then start to use that diagram for something completely different. They were able to use the diagram to kind of go, and based on this thing and this process and what we do, so they started to own that story. So the power of telling stories, also visually and sketching badly, so you see how it all kind of ties in, was actually pretty cool. So tell stories is one of the things that we actually do in design, is to be a really good storyteller. And Paul Taylor introduced me to a phrase that I had not come across before, which was storyscaping. So this is actually about stories that shape experience, and what he was going into was the world of brand, and how do you actually take an idea that is a brand and create an experience out of it. So he was talking about the fact that you'd buy a teddy bear and it's like $8, but then why is a Cabbage Patch doll so much more expensive, and why is this particular teddy bear that you get to construct so much more expensive? It's because of the experience that gets attached to it, and therefore you put value on that type of thing. So his challenge was, how do you actually create experiences, not just products? Okay, Getting there, counting down to 10. Ian talked about breaking breaking the connection between the idea and the owner. And this was, again, a throwaway line in a really good presentation. But what I liked about this was, the point was to get rid of the ego. And sometimes the owner is the dickhead. And nobody actually wants to go across with that particular idea because it came from that person. So, it happens, right? Right? Everyone's nodding. You all know dickheads out there with great ideas. So I thought it was an important point. I thought I'd pass that on to you. Alright, surface delight versus deep delight. The difference between dating and an actual relationship. So, there, that was it. No, it was their words. I swear to God, I did not make that up. But what they were talking about here was the surface delight, and when we were talking about creating delightful products. And they came up with a really cool phrase, which was minimum delightful product, so as opposed to viable. Because viable isn't really going to cut it these days, it actually has to be pretty cool, and delight is often what defines that. The surface delight is around the first time use, the interactions that are cute and fun and everything. But the regular use over time is actually what's going to make or break something, whether it becomes part of someone's usage or pattern or, goes on to the next one, cool. Yeah, rhythm, cadence. And the reason why the box is so big is I was trying to visualize time. It's a big, long thing. Two people actually talked about time. It came up quite a lot, but it was the first time I'd actually come across this phrasing or this concept in terms of the design that we do. Michelle Berryman did a great talk on the fact that time is the invisible factor that we actually are designing for, but we don't talk about. So it's invisible, it's hard to measure. Well, we know how to measure it, but we don't measure it in our design. We often do our design based on the interactions, the minute, whether the menu, flows out or swipes from a particular thing. But what about the secondary, tertiary, when they become an expert user over years, or it's sporadic use? So how do you actually think about that? What's the rhythm? What's the intensity of actual usage? And start planning for that, and start thinking about it when you're actually designing from the beginning. Because everything is important, but we often stop at a certain point and don't really think about the long term. And the last bit. So Steve Beatty actually gave one of the last talks after the closing speaker. But this came up quite a lot in terms of taking a problem and then changing it on itself so that you could frame a problem and then reframe it. So Steve Portigal, I was lucky enough to be in his workshop. He did this really fun exercise, and I'd highly recommend it. So everyone got a Post-it, and on the Post-it you actually had to come up with like the worst idea ever. So that's kind of hard to do, right? It's like the opposite of our jobs. So, people came up with stuff like, one of the examples was candy for breakfast, or people were like, yeah, that's so not the worst idea. You're starting to think about it. But they'd sketch it out on a Post-it. The Post-it was the container for it. Then you'd hand it over to somebody else, and someone else had to come up with the perfect usage of that thing. So then you came up with an awesome scenario, and we started to get really into sci-fi to resolve some of these issues. But the idea was to just exercise that whole creativity about looking at a problem and then looking at the opportunity of that problem in the same space. And that was all about reframing it. And what Steve actually talked about was if you are able to reframe issues, take a step back, look at the issue, and then switch it on its head, reframe it, have a look at what-if possibilities. You actually can come up with some really interesting things, and that's where innovation, actual innovation happens. It's not a variation of something, it's turning something on its head. And Ian also talked about focusing on the intent. Get past what the organization is meant to do. Have an 11. Crap. I should have gone to 11. Yeah, I'll stop there. Come talk to me, I'll have another beer. Maybe it'll create. So that was that. And then everybody else was really kind enough to contribute stuff. There was really good advice there about, like, don't shag anyone in the same office as you. So, good career advice. Shit, it's being recorded. But yeah, a lot of stuff was about empathy, listening, and so it didn't stop the learning. Everybody at the conference was able to contribute. So the talks and presentations and slides are starting to progress. They're being uploaded onto the website. So go have a look, listen to the audio feed, and that was the extract. So hope to see you there 2015.